If someone offers you a marriage with an expiration date, the real question is not why they want you to stay, but why they are already planning for you to leave. The smell of fresh pine filled the air inside Luke Harrison's woodworking shop on a cool Colorado afternoon. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, painting long golden lines across stacks of unfinished furniture. The steady hum of machinery mixed with the soft sound of country music playing from an old radio near the workbench. It was an ordinary day. Luke preferred ordinary days. At 43, the single father had built a life around simple routines, honest work, and raising his teenage daughter with dignity. He had no interest in luxury, no interest in headlines, and certainly no interest in billionaires. That was why he nearly laughed when a black luxury sedan pulled into the gravel lot outside his shop. The vehicle looked completely out of place among pickup trucks and lumber deliveries. The driver's door opened first. Then a woman stepped out. Elegant, confident, composed. Even before she entered the building, Luke recognized her face. Everyone in America knew who Evelyn Sinclair was. The billionaire CEO of Sinclair Capital rarely appeared without cameras following her. Today she arrived alone. Luke wiped sawdust from his hands as she approached. "Can I help you?" he asked. Evelyn looked around the workshop before meeting his eyes. "I hope so." Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. Luke waited. "I need a husband." Silence followed. Somewhere in the corner, a machine finished its cycle with a soft click. Luke blinked once. "I think you may have the wrong building." Evelyn did not smile. "I am completely serious." Luke studied her face. No sign of a joke. No sign of embarrassment. Just determination. Why would a billionaire need to visit a furniture shop to find a husband? Evelyn reached into her designer bag and placed a folder on the workbench. "Because I am not looking for a husband forever." Luke folded his arms. "That somehow sounds worse." For the first time, a faint smile appeared on her face. 6 months. Luke stared at her. 6 months. Marry me for 6 months. Then we go our separate ways. The words hung in the air. Outside, a light breeze moved through the pine trees surrounding the property. Inside, the workshop suddenly felt much quieter. Luke looked at the folder but made no move to touch it. "Why me?" Evelyn glanced around the room. Her eyes stopped on a photograph sitting near the register. It showed Luke and his daughter smiling beside a handmade dining table. Something softened briefly in her expression. "Because every person I know wants something from me." Luke said nothing. Evelyn continued. "Money, influence, access, power." She paused. "You were the first person who looked at me and seemed completely unimpressed." Luke almost laughed. "That is your sales pitch." "No." She pushed the folder toward him. "This is..." Luke opened it. Inside sat a contract. 6 months. Financial terms. Confidentiality agreements. Legal documents prepared with extraordinary precision. Then he reached the final page. His eyes narrowed. There, beneath the contract details, was a single handwritten note. Not from a lawyer. Not from an executive. From Evelyn herself. "If I do not fulfill this condition before my 37th birthday, I lose control of my father's company." Luke slowly looked up. For the first time since arriving, Evelyn's confidence cracked slightly. Beneath the billionaire. Beneath the CEO. Beneath the carefully controlled image. He saw something else. Fear. Real fear. And in that moment, Luke realized this strange proposal was hiding a much bigger story than either of them had admitted. Luke Harrison spent most of that evening trying to convince himself the conversation had never happened. After Evelyn Sinclair left his workshop, he finished sanding a dining table, locked the front doors, and drove home through the winding mountain roads outside Denver. Yet no matter how hard he tried to focus on ordinary things, the image of the contract remained in his mind. The billionaire's expression had not looked manipulative. It had looked desperate. That detail bothered him more than the proposal itself. His daughter Emma noticed immediately. During dinner, she watched him push food around his plate without saying much. "Okay," she finally said. "What happened?" Luke looked up. "What makes you think something happened?" Emma laughed. "Because you have been staring at the mashed potatoes for 5 minutes." Luke smiled despite himself. "A woman came by the shop today." Emma raised an eyebrow. "A customer?" "Not exactly." "Then what?" Luke hesitated. The situation sounded ridiculous even inside his own head. "She asked me to marry her." Emma nearly dropped her fork. "What?" Luke nodded slowly. "That was my reaction too." 10 minutes later, after hearing the entire story, Emma sat speechless. Finally, she asked the question Luke had been asking himself all day. Why would someone like her choose you? Luke shrugged. Apparently because I am not impressed by billionaires. Emma laughed. Then her smile faded. You are not actually considering it, are you? Luke looked out the kitchen window toward the dark mountains beyond the property. No. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. Because deep down, he was considering it. The next morning, his phone rang before sunrise. The caller identification displayed an unfamiliar number. Luke already knew who it was. Good morning, Evelyn said after he answered. It is 6:30. I know. Most people consider that early. Most people are not trying to save a company. Luke sighed. I already told you I am not interested. Silence followed. Then Evelyn spoke softly. Please let me explain everything. 2 hours later, Luke found himself sitting across from her inside a private conference room overlooking downtown Denver. The contrast between their worlds could not have been greater. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed skyscrapers and busy streets below. Expensive artwork decorated the walls. Staff members moved quietly through hallways outside. Luke felt as though he had stepped onto another planet. Evelyn placed a folder on the table. This is my father's will. Luke frowned. You brought legal documents? You deserve the truth. She opened the file. Inside sat pages of legal language accompanied by handwritten notes. Luke listened as Evelyn explained. 6 months before his death, her father had amended his will. One condition stood above all others. 2. Maintain controlling ownership of Sinclair Capital. Evelyn had to be legally married before her 37th birthday and remain married for 6 months. Otherwise, control would transfer to a family trust managed by a board committee. Luke studied the document carefully. Who controls the committee? Evelyn's expression hardened immediately. My uncle Gregory. The answer explained everything. Or almost everything. Your father did not trust him? Luke asked. Evelyn looked away toward the city skyline. My father trusted very few people near the end of his life. There was pain in her voice now. Real pain. Not the polished confidence of a billionaire executive. Luke noticed it immediately. And you waited until now? Evelyn nodded. I thought I could find another solution. But you did not. No. The room fell quiet. Outside, sunlight reflected across glass towers. Inside, Luke found himself studying the woman sitting across from him. For the first time, she looked less like a billionaire and more like someone carrying a burden she could no longer carry alone. Then Evelyn reached into her bag and removed another document. Unlike the others, this one was not legal. It was personal. A handwritten letter from her father. She slid it across the table. Read the last paragraph. Luke did, and when he reached the final sentence, his entire understanding of the situation changed. Because according to the letter, Evelyn's father had specifically written one unexpected instruction. If my daughter ever chooses a husband, choose a man with character, not a man with power. Suddenly, Luke understood why Evelyn had driven all the way to a woodworking shop in Colorado. Luke Harrison had spent his entire life trusting actions more than words. That was why, 3 days later, he still had not signed the contract. He had read every page twice. He had spoken with attorneys. He had listened to Evelyn Sinclair explain her situation. Yet something inside him remained unsettled. Not because he thought she was lying. Quite the opposite. The more he learned about her, the more he believed she was telling the truth. And somehow that made the decision even harder. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Luke sat on the porch outside his home overlooking the mountains. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine through the valley. Across the yard, his daughter Emma worked on a school project while their golden retriever slept in the grass nearby. It was a peaceful scene. The kind of peace Luke had spent years building after losing his wife. He was not eager to invite chaos into it. Emma eventually looked up from her notebook. You are thinking about her again. Luke smiled. Am I that obvious? Only when you stare at mountains without actually seeing them. Luke laughed softly. Then his expression grew thoughtful. What would you do? Emma considered the question seriously. I think she is lonely. Luke blinked. That is your conclusion? You said she has everything except someone she trusts. Emma shrugged. That sounds lonely. The answer stayed with him long after the conversation ended. 2 days later, Luke found himself standing outside Sinclair Tower in downtown Denver. The building rose above the city like a monument to success. Glass and steel reflected the afternoon sun, while luxury vehicles moved through the entrance below. Employees hurried through revolving doors carrying tablets and briefcases. Everything about the place felt larger than life. Luke wore the same denim jacket he always wore, the same boots, the same quiet confidence. Inside the executive offices, Evelyn waited beside a conference table overlooking the city. She seemed surprised when he entered. "You came." Luke placed the contract on the table. "I have questions." Evelyn smiled slightly. "That means you have not said no." Luke ignored the observation. "If I agree, there are conditions." She folded her arms. "I am listening. First, my daughter comes first. Always." Evelyn nodded immediately. "Agreed." "Second, I am not changing who I am." "Agreed." "Third, after 6 months, we leave this arrangement with respect regardless of what happens." Something flickered briefly across Evelyn's face. A hesitation, almost too fast to notice. "Agreed," she said. Luke studied her carefully. The response sounded correct, yet something in her eyes suggested she disliked hearing it. Before he could ask why, the conference room door opened unexpectedly. A tall man in an expensive suit entered without knocking. His expression hardened immediately when he saw Luke. "So this is him." The room grew noticeably colder. Evelyn's posture changed. Her shoulders tightened. Her voice lost its warmth. "Gregory." The older man smiled, but there was no kindness behind it. "I was beginning to wonder when our future son-in-law would appear." Luke recognized him immediately from business magazines. Gregory Sinclair, board member, investor, family power broker. The very man who would gain control of Sinclair Capital if Evelyn failed to meet the conditions of her father's will. Gregory looked Luke up and down. A woodworker. His tone carried quiet amusement. "Father always did enjoy surprises." Luke remained calm. "Nice to meet you too." Gregory's smile widened slightly. "Trust me, the pleasure is entirely mine." After he left, silence lingered in the room. Evelyn stared toward the closed door. Her expression revealed frustration she could barely contain. Luke finally understood something important. The 6-month marriage was not simply about inheritance. It was a shield, protection against a battle that had already begun. Then Evelyn looked back at him and quietly said the words that changed everything. "If you walk away, Gregory wins." And for the first time since this strange journey began, Luke realized he was no longer deciding whether to help a billionaire. He was deciding whether to help someone who had nobody else standing beside her. Luke Harrison signed the contract 3 days later. There was no dramatic ceremony, no celebration, no grand speech. The decision happened quietly inside a law office overlooking downtown Denver. Attorneys reviewed documents. Witnesses signed forms. Pens moved across paper. By noon, everything was official. 6 months. 180 days. Then both parties would walk away. At least that was the plan. News traveled faster than either of them expected. By sunset, major business networks were discussing the marriage. Financial analysts debated motives. Social media exploded with theories. Some people believed Luke was chasing money. Others assumed Evelyn was hiding a scandal. Very few imagined the truth. Luke ignored most of it. He had spent too many years building a life based on substance rather than opinions. Still, when reporters gathered outside his workshop the following morning, even he was surprised. Cameras lined the entrance. Microphones appeared from every direction. Questions flew through the air. How did you meet? Was this planned? Are you moving into Sinclair Manor? Luke answered none of them. He simply climbed into his truck and drove away. That evening, he arrived at Sinclair Manor for the first time. The estate sat on a hillside overlooking the city. Iron gates opened onto a winding private road lined with perfectly trimmed trees. The main residence looked less like a home and more like a luxury hotel. Tall stone walls, expansive windows, elegant fountains. The property stretched across dozens of acres. Luke parked near the entrance and stepped out slowly. For a moment, he simply stared. Then he smiled to himself. One family lives here. A nearby employee laughed quietly. Most people have the same reaction. Inside, the mansion felt even larger. Marble floors reflected warm lighting. Original artwork covered the walls. A grand staircase curved upward through the center of the home. Everything was beautiful. Everything was expensive. Yet somehow the place felt strangely empty. Evelyn met him near the entrance. "Welcome home." Luke glanced around. Home is a strong word. For a brief second, something flickered across her expression. Disappointment. Then it vanished behind a polite smile. "Fair enough. Over the next several days, they settled into an unusual routine. Publicly, they appeared as a newly married couple attending events, meetings, and charity functions. Cameras followed them constantly. Headlines analyzed every photograph. Yet privately, their relationship remained polite and distant. Two people honoring an agreement. Nothing more. One evening, after a charity dinner in Denver, they returned to the estate long after sunset. The house was quiet. Most staff had gone home. Luke loosened his tie and walked into the kitchen looking for coffee. To his surprise, Evelyn was already there. Not in designer clothing. Not in executive attire. Just comfortable clothes and no audience. She looked exhausted. Long day, Luke asked. Evelyn laughed softly. You have no idea. She sat at the kitchen island and rubbed her eyes. For the first time, she looked her age. Not like a billionaire. Not like a CEO. Just a tired woman carrying too much responsibility. Luke poured coffee into 2 mugs and handed one to her. Thank you. You look like you needed it. Evelyn smiled faintly. Most people around me try to solve problems with meetings. Luke sat across from her. Sometimes coffee works better. The silence that followed felt surprisingly comfortable. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. Inside, the massive mansion felt smaller somehow. Warmer. Then Luke noticed something unusual. On the far side of the kitchen sat a framed family photograph. A younger Evelyn stood beside her father. Both were smiling. Yet what caught his attention was not the photograph itself. It was the way Evelyn looked at it. There was grief in her eyes. The kind that never fully leaves. You miss him, Luke said quietly. Evelyn stared at the photograph for several seconds before answering. Every day. Her voice nearly broke on the final word. And in that moment, Luke realized the greatest burden she carried was not the company, the inheritance, or even Gregory Sinclair. It was the loneliness she had been hiding from the world ever since her father was gone. 37 days passed before Luke Harrison realized something unexpected was happening. The marriage still looked artificial from the outside. Newspapers continued publishing photographs. Business commentators continued debating motives. Every public appearance generated new speculation. Yet behind the cameras, something had changed. The distance between him and Evelyn Sinclair was slowly disappearing. Not because either of them planned it. Because life had a way of creating connection through ordinary moments. One Saturday morning, Luke returned from Colorado with Emma, who had agreed to spend part of the summer at Sinclair Manor. The estate staff seemed nervous about having a teenager in the house. Emma was not. Within an hour, she had learned the names of half the employees and somehow convinced the kitchen staff to teach her how to make homemade cinnamon rolls. By lunchtime, laughter echoed through rooms that had spent years feeling silent. Evelyn noticed immediately. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen watching Emma explain a school project while several employees listened with genuine interest. For a brief moment, a smile appeared on Evelyn's face. Not the practiced smile she used during interviews. A real one. Luke saw it. You should do that more often. Evelyn looked at him. Do what? Smile. She rolled her eyes. That was terrible. Luke laughed. Still true. Later that evening, the three of them sat on the back terrace overlooking the city lights. Emma talked about school, college plans, and her dream of studying architecture. Evelyn listened carefully. More carefully than most adults did. When Emma finally went inside, silence settled over the terrace. Warm summer air moved gently through the gardens surrounding the estate. She is remarkable, Evelyn said quietly. Luke nodded. She got all the good qualities from her mother. Evelyn looked down at her coffee. You still talk about her often. Luke followed her gaze toward the city skyline. Some people never really leave. The words hung gently between them. Evelyn seemed to understand. Grief recognized grief. Neither needed to explain it. A week later, Sinclair Capital hosted its annual leadership summit at a luxury resort in Aspen. Hundreds of executives attended. Investors arrived from across the country. Gregory Sinclair spent most of the event criticizing Evelyn's decisions with carefully disguised politeness. Every conversation felt like a chess match. Every meeting carried hidden agendas. Luke observed quietly from the sidelines. He noticed how exhausted Evelyn became by the end of each day. He noticed how often she carried responsibilities alone. Most importantly, he noticed that nobody around her ever challenged her when she was wrong. They simply agreed. Out of fear, out of ambition, or both. During one executive dinner, a heated discussion emerged. regarding layoffs at a struggling manufacturing division. Several executives recommended immediate cuts. Gregory supported them enthusiastically. The numbers make perfect sense, Gregory insisted. Luke finally spoke. Maybe, but numbers are not the people losing their jobs. The room grew quiet. Several executives looked surprised that he had spoken at all. Gregory smiled coldly. Business requires difficult decisions. Luke met his gaze calmly. Leadership requires remembering who pays the price for those decisions. Silence followed. No argument. No confrontation. Just silence. Yet something important shifted. Later that night, Evelyn found Luke standing alone on a balcony overlooking the mountains. You embarrassed half my executive team. Luke smiled. Only half. To his surprise, Evelyn laughed. Then her expression softened. You said something nobody else was willing to say. Luke shrugged. Someone should. Evelyn stared out toward the distant lights scattered across the mountainside. My father used to talk like that. The admission seemed to surprise even her. Luke remained quiet. Sometimes the most respectful thing a person could offer was space. Finally, Evelyn spoke again. Her voice was almost a whisper. The strange part is that I am starting to trust you. Luke looked at her. Neither smiled. Neither looked away. And somewhere beneath the contract, beneath the inheritance battle, beneath all the reasons this marriage existed in the first place, something far more dangerous had quietly begun to grow. By the time the calendar reached day 92, the contract no longer felt like a contract. Neither Luke Harrison nor Evelyn Sinclair said that aloud, but both felt it. The routines that once seemed temporary had quietly become normal. Morning coffee in the kitchen before meetings. Late-night conversations on the terrace overlooking the city. Weekend visits from Emma that somehow transformed Sinclair Manor from a mansion into something closer to a home. Yet beneath the growing comfort, a shadow remained. Evelyn was hiding something. Luke sensed it every time her smile faded unexpectedly. Every time she stared at her father's photograph a little too long. Every time certain subjects caused her to change the conversation. One rainy evening in early autumn, he finally discovered why. The house was unusually quiet. Emma had returned to Colorado for school. Most of the staff had gone home. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows while Luke searched for a book he had left in the library. As he passed a partially open office door, he noticed a light still on inside. Evelyn sat alone at her father's old desk. She did not see him. Papers covered the surface. Her shoulders were tense. For a moment, Luke considered leaving. Then he heard something unexpected. Crying. Not loud. Not dramatic. The quiet kind a person makes when they believe nobody is watching. Luke gently knocked on the doorframe. Evelyn immediately wiped her eyes and straightened. I am fine. Luke stepped into the room. No, you are not. Silence followed. The rain continued outside. Finally, Evelyn laughed bitterly. You know, it is strange. What is? I manage a company worth billions of dollars. She looked down at the papers. But I still feel like the scared daughter who disappointed her father. Luke frowned. Disappointed him how? For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she opened a drawer and removed an old newspaper clipping. Luke sat beside her and read the headline. 5 years earlier, Sinclair Capital had nearly completed an acquisition that ended in disaster. The company lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Investors panicked. The media blamed Evelyn personally. Luke remembered the story vaguely. You think that was your fault? Evelyn nodded. Because it was. Her voice trembled. My father warned me not to trust the people advising me. She looked toward the rain-covered windows. I ignored him. Luke remained quiet. Evelyn continued. 3 months later, he became ill. She swallowed hard. The last serious conversation we had was an argument. The confession seemed to cost her something. Years of pain surfaced all at once. Then he died before I could make it right. The room grew still. Luke finally understood. The inheritance battle. The pressure. The perfectionism. None of it came from ambition. It came from guilt. Evelyn had spent years trying to earn forgiveness from someone who was no longer there to give it. Luke gently placed the newspaper clipping back on the desk. Your father trusted you enough to leave you the company. Evelyn looked away. Maybe he changed his mind. Luke shook his head. No. His voice was calm but certain. A man does not leave his life's work to someone he does not believe in. Evelyn stared at him. For the first time that evening, hope flickered in her eyes. Small, fragile, real. Then she asked a question that revealed just how much she trusted him. Do you ever wonder what your life would look like if you had made different choices? Luke smiled sadly. Every parent does. Evelyn laughed through tears. The sound was soft, but genuine. And as the rain continued falling outside the old mansion, neither of them noticed that something far more important than trust had begun taking root between them. Something neither contract nor calendar could control. Day 123 arrived with the first snow of the season. Thin white flakes drifted across the gardens surrounding Sinclair Manor, covering the grounds in a quiet blanket of winter. From the outside, everything appeared peaceful. Inside Sinclair Capital, however, a storm was building. Gregory Sinclair had finally decided to make his move. The warning arrived on a Monday morning. Evelyn Sinclair entered the executive boardroom carrying a tablet and a cup of coffee. The room felt unusually silent when she walked in. Several board members avoided eye contact. Others seemed uncomfortable. That was never a good sign. Gregory sat at the far end of the table with a faint smile. "Good morning, Evelyn." His voice sounded almost cheerful. Evelyn immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" Gregory slid a document across the table. "A special vote has been requested." The room became even quieter. Evelyn scanned the paperwork. Her pulse quickened. Several major investors were demanding an emergency review of company leadership. If successful, the vote could strip her of operational authority before the 6-month requirement was completed. Gregory had found a way around her father's will. Not legally. Strategically. Evelyn slowly lowered the document. "You organized this." Gregory smiled. "I encouraged concerned shareholders to ask reasonable questions." The words sounded polite. The intention behind them did not. Across town, Luke Harrison was working in a small office Sinclair Capital had provided for him when his phone rang. He answered immediately. One glance at Evelyn's expression through the video call told him everything he needed to know. "What happened?" She hesitated. "Gregory is trying to remove me." Luke stood. "Can he do that?" "Maybe." Her answer carried more fear than he had heard in months. By evening, emergency meetings filled every floor of Sinclair Tower. Lawyers reviewed corporate bylaws. Executives exchanged rumors. Investors demanded explanations. The company felt less like a business and more like a battlefield of competing interests. Yet the most surprising moment came later that night. Luke found Evelyn alone inside her office overlooking the city. The lights of Denver stretched endlessly beyond the glass. She stood silently near the window. "You should go home," Luke said. Evelyn laughed softly. "I do not think I remember how." Luke walked closer. For the first time since he met her, she looked defeated. Not angry, not frustrated. Defeated. "What if he wins?" she asked quietly. Luke considered the question. "Then you start again." Evelyn shook her head. "You make everything sound simple." "No." Luke smiled gently. "I just know you are stronger than you think." The words lingered in the room. Evelyn looked at him. Really looked at him. The man who had entered her life as a solution to a legal problem had somehow become the person she trusted most. That realization frightened her more than Gregory ever could. The next morning brought another surprise. Emma arrived unexpectedly from Colorado for a school break. The moment she entered Sinclair Manor, she sensed the tension. "What happened?" she asked during breakfast. Luke explained the situation carefully. Emma listened. Then she looked directly at Evelyn. "My dad always says something." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "What is that?" Emma smiled. "People who need power usually have less of it than they pretend." The room fell silent. Then, unexpectedly, Evelyn laughed. A real laugh. Warm and genuine. Even Luke joined in. For a few moments, the pressure disappeared. Hope returned. Yet later that afternoon, as Gregory prepared for the shareholder vote, a confidential report arrived on Evelyn's desk. She opened it expecting financial data. Instead, she found evidence that someone inside the company had been secretly feeding information to Gregory for months. The betrayal came from the last person she would have suspected, and suddenly the battle for her future became far more personal than either she or Luke had imagined. Day 161 began with betrayal and ended with clarity. Snow covered the streets outside Sinclair Tower as executives hurried into conference rooms carrying reports, laptops, and rumors. The confidential investigation launched by Evelyn Sinclair had revealed the source of the information leaks. What shocked everyone was not the existence of a traitor. It was the identity. The person feeding Gregory Sinclair private information was Thomas Reed, Evelyn's longtime chief financial officer. For nearly 8 years, he had worked beside her. He had attended strategy meetings, celebrated company milestones, and advised her during some of the most difficult periods of her career. She trusted him completely, or at least she had. Thomas sat silently across from her in a private conference room while legal advisors reviewed evidence. Bank transfers, private communications, internal documents shared without authorization. The facts were undeniable. Yet Evelyn felt no anger, only disappointment. Why? She finally asked. Thomas lowered his eyes. Because Gregory promised stability. Evelyn stared at him. You sold loyalty for certainty. Thomas sighed heavily. I thought he would win eventually. The answer hurt more than any excuse could have, not because it involved money or power, because it revealed how little faith he had in her. Hours later, after Thomas resigned, the atmosphere inside Sinclair Capital remained tense. Gregory still controlled enough influence to force the upcoming shareholder vote. The battle was far from over. That evening, Evelyn returned to Sinclair Manor exhausted. The house was quiet except for the soft sound of music drifting from the family room. She followed it and stopped in the doorway. Luke Harrison sat at the dining table helping Emma review architectural sketches for a school competition. Papers covered the surface. Coffee mugs sat nearby. Both were laughing about something. For a moment, Evelyn simply watched. Neither noticed her. The scene felt ordinary, beautifully ordinary, the kind of moment money could never buy. Eventually Emma spotted her. There she is. Luke looked up and immediately noticed the fatigue in Evelyn's face. Long day. Evelyn nodded. Long year. Emma gathered her papers. I should probably finish this upstairs. Luke smiled knowingly. Within seconds, the room belonged to only two people. Evelyn sat across from him and rested her hands around a cup of tea. Neither spoke immediately. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the windows. Inside, silence felt comfortable. Thomas resigned, she finally said. Luke nodded. I heard. I trusted him. I know. Evelyn stared into her tea. Maybe Gregory was right. Luke frowned. About what? Maybe I am not the leader my father believed I could become. The words lingered between them. Luke leaned back slightly. Do you know what I have noticed? Evelyn looked up. What? Every person who tells me you are failing seems to benefit if you believe it. Silence followed. Evelyn blinked. Luke continued. Gregory benefits. The board benefits. People afraid of change benefit. He smiled gently. The only person who does not benefit from that story is you. For the first time all day, Evelyn laughed softly. Then her expression grew serious again. There are only 19 days left. Luke knew exactly what she meant. 19 days until the contract ended. 19 days until their agreement expired. 19 days until he returned to Colorado. The reality settled quietly between them. Neither seemed eager to discuss it. Finally, Evelyn stood and walked toward the window overlooking the snowy gardens. Do you ever think about what happens afterward? She asked. Luke took longer to answer than usual. More often than I should. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. The response carried more meaning than either intended. Neither spoke again for several moments. Then Luke noticed a folder resting on the nearby table. It contained the final shareholder projections. He opened it and immediately understood something important. Gregory's support was weakening. Investors were beginning to side with Evelyn. The battle was turning. Hope was returning. Yet as Luke looked toward the woman standing by the window, he realized something else. Winning the company was no longer the question keeping her awake at night. The real question was what would happen when day 180 finally arrived. Day 179 arrived beneath a clear winter sky. Sunlight reflected across fresh snow surrounding Sinclair Manor, while the city beyond glittered under crisp morning light. Inside Sinclair Capital headquarters, the final shareholder vote ended shortly before noon. The result was decisive. Gregory Sinclair's challenge failed. Investor support remained firmly behind Evelyn Sinclair. Years of pressure, months of uncertainty, and countless sleepless nights had finally reached their conclusion. When the meeting ended, board members applauded. Executives congratulated her. Reporters waited outside for statements. Yet despite the victory, Evelyn felt none of the relief she expected. Because another deadline had arrived. One she could not postpone. One she could not negotiate. The contract ended tomorrow. Across town, Luke Harrison stood inside the guest suite he had occupied for nearly 6 months. An open suitcase rested on the bed. Clothes were neatly folded. Personal items had already been packed. The room looked strangely empty, like a chapter quietly closing. He paused while placing the last framed photograph of Emma into a travel bag. The sight of it made him smile. Then his gaze drifted toward the window overlooking the estate. For months this place had never felt like home. Somehow that had changed without him noticing. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Emma stepped into the room, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You are really leaving?" Luke accepted the cup. That was always the deal. Emma sat beside the suitcase. "You know she loves you, right?" Luke nearly choked on his coffee. "Emma, I am serious." She folded her arms. "Everybody can see it except the 2 of you." Luke laughed quietly. Yet his daughter had planted a thought he could not ignore. Later that afternoon, after Emma left for the airport, silence settled across the manor. Staff moved quietly through hallways. Snow drifted gently outside. Luke carried his final bag downstairs. The house felt different. Too quiet. He knew Evelyn was somewhere inside preparing statements for the media after her victory. Part of him wanted to say goodbye immediately. Another part hoped to avoid the conversation altogether. Fate made the decision for him. As he entered the grand foyer, Evelyn appeared at the opposite end of the hall. She stopped when she saw the suitcase. For several seconds, neither spoke. The distance between them suddenly felt much larger than a few yards. "You packed?" Luke nodded. "My flight leaves tomorrow morning." Evelyn tried to smile. It did not quite work. "Right." Silence followed. The kind of silence that says more than words ever could. Luke looked around the foyer. "You won." Evelyn nodded slowly. "We won." The correction hung in the air. Luke smiled. "You did the hard part." Evelyn lowered her eyes briefly. Then she looked back at him. "Stay for dinner." Luke hesitated. "Evelyn, please." Her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. That evening, they sat alone in the dining room. No executives. No lawyers. No cameras. Just 2 people sharing one final meal. Conversation came slowly. Both avoided the subject waiting between them. Finally, after dessert plates had been cleared away and the house had fallen silent, Luke stood. "I should get some sleep." Evelyn nodded. But she did not move. Luke took a step toward the door. Then another. Behind him, a chair slid softly across the floor. He turned. Evelyn stood in the center of the room. Her eyes shimmered beneath the warm light. Not with weakness. Not with fear. With honesty. Months earlier she had asked him to marry her because she needed a solution. Now, she spoke because she needed the truth. "Do not go." The words were barely above a whisper. Luke froze. Evelyn took a slow breath. "When this started, I thought I needed a husband for 6 months." Her voice trembled slightly. "Then somewhere along the way, you became my best friend." Tears gathered in her eyes. "You became the person I trust most." Silence filled the room. The clock on the wall continued ticking. Outside, snow drifted through the darkness. Evelyn stepped closer. "Tomorrow is day 180. She smiled sadly. "But today is day 179. Another heartbeat passed. Then another. Finally, she said the words she never imagined she would need to say. "Please stay." Luke looked at the woman standing before him. The billionaire who once offered him a contract. The daughter still healing from loss. The leader who had learned to believe in herself again. And in that quiet moment, the countdown that had governed their entire story simply stopped mattering. Because some promises have expiration dates. But love, dignity, and second chances do not.